G'day guys. So the other day I was engaged in a conversation with Bertrand from the OpenTX project, and we were having a chat about the new Tandem X20 that Frsky are delivering. And well, quite simply it sounded like quite a fascinating product. So a little bit of, bouncing around and mentioning my interest to some of the guys, and a couple of weeks later I've got one of these. So this is a pre-production unit of the Frsky X20 Tandem. And one of the big hints that it's pre-production, it's a little sticker on the back saying #4. It's clearly number 4. I don't know how many have been built, but yeah. So I have an X20 Tandem to have a play with. Now, I really wanted to run you through essentially what you get for your money at this point, what I understand the state of development is, and kind of a little bit about the radio, because quite simply it's pretty fantastic. So let's crack on. As you can see here, I'm holding this, and it's a pretty decent, comfortable looking radio. It just feels nice in the hand. If we subjectively compare this to another radio, which I'm sure a lot of you may be interested, I will start with saying let's pull out the TBS Tango. And we can see here it's bigger than the Tango, which is no real surprise, is it? But not significantly so. It is what it is. Maybe a more subjective comparison is to take a Jetty. And there's the Jetty DS16, which is a great big solid chunky radio. And you can see, you can barely see the radio underneath. The tandem disappears. So let's pop this the other way around, for example. And as we can see here now, it's actually quite a compact little bit of kit. You can really get a sense of the sizing we have available here. It's really a very compact, just nice unit. It feels good in the hands. It really makes my DS16 feel like a brick in comparison. So let's put the brick to the side, and there we go, the Tandem again. Now, all up, running a 2S lithium ion, the radio weighs about 0.8 kilos, which is not terribly much. It's a very, very comfortable radio in terms of weight. You know, when you're standing in a field, that feels about right. You're not going to get a sore neck with a neck strap on, and you're not going to worry so much about holding this without a neck strap. And that's kind of cool. In terms of the ergonomics, I kind of like this style. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but for me personally, I like it. It's relatively comfortable in the hand. You know, your palms fit in quite nicely. And I think if you're a thumb flyer, particularly so, this is just about spot on. Now, for me personally, I do have a small issue. I'm much more of a pinch flyer. And the result is that I tend to hold, well, in fact, if I held the radio there with my palms in there, that would be spot on. I'd have nice full reach, everything. But I personally have a horrible habit, because I'm a tray flyer and I'm used to holding like so. When I pick up a handheld radio, I tend to do that. And the result is that I bump the switches. But this is completely, this is my issue. I think the vast majority of people will pick up their radio and hold it like that. And you've got a good, solid system. It works. Switch-wise, very much in line with every Frsky radio I've ever used. We have a single double pole switch at the back here. This is typically used for arming and disarming. 3 position, 3 position, 3, another 3, another 3, another 3, and a trainer. Now, I personally would have loved to have seen Frsky release a 2 position and a 2 position. This is a throwback to the the Tyrannus days where the OpenTX developers were complaining about ER9X and the Turnigy 9X having too few switches. You know, they were, if I remember correctly, the TH9X radio had one 3-position switch, and the guys were saying, we need more 3 positions. Well, FreeSky have put 3 positions on bloody every switch, and they have from day one since then. I would have preferred to say, okay, 3 position, maybe a 3, and then a 2 and a 2, because that's perfect for, like, say, a landing gear up and down. But hey, again, my personal choice. What else do we have? We have a slider. Well, maybe I shouldn't call it a slider as opposed to a sideways potentiometer, but it's useful for camber. There's one on either side. We have another slider over here. Now this one I'm particularly partial to, simply because it's almost in that ideal position where I'm flying. I can go there, set my camber on the glider, and forget about it. And it's kind of not going to get bumped, whereas you find these ones on the side tend to get bumped. So that's kind of in a nice position. On the back of the radio, we have another 2 buttons. There's one there and one there. And those are handily positioned, where if I take it there so you can see on that camera, my index fingers can press them. Now, I would hazard a guess, for myself, I would probably put my audio alerts onto those 2 buttons. So if I'm flying and I wanted to know my battery voltage, I could just go click and the audio would read out my battery voltage. It kind of makes sense. What else? Down here, obviously we got some trim switches. They're actually very, very chunky trim switches, and far bigger than standard, but they kind of give this retro-y, cool feeling, but they're also very ergonomic and tactile. That is a good thing, because you're not going to mistake those trim switches with those buttons. Where else do we go? We have a multi-select button. These are very familiar to anybody who uses a Horus or an X10S. Same fundamental concept with telemetry return, all the same sort of stuff. Now, over here we've got 3 buttons and 3 buttons. Back in the original Horus radios, there was a centralized switch over here, a 6-position switch. And what FreeSky have done, and I guess they got this idea from the Radio Masters and such, which started putting 6 buttons across the top, they've created 6 buttons, and it really does actually work a lot better to do that, in my opinion, because the 6-position switch is too blimmin' hard to find what you're looking for, whereas over here, I could be flying and go flight mode, I don't know, 1, 2, you know, it should be relatively easy to find, and it feels like a good location. I've not tested it in practice, but it does feel good. And then finally, on the back of the radio, we have, as expected, the module bay. This is an X-Lite module bay. It currently supports things like the XJT modules, etc., which I assume will all fit perfectly. I have hit a small problem. I purchased a TBS Lite module to plug in the back, but unfortunately it doesn't fit because there's a collision between the handle and the SMA connector. I have raised this with Trappy, and apparently there is talk and works of getting CSRF supported on the radio, and quite likely, I imagine, a slightly modified module bay case to avoid that collision. You know, it's early days, this is pre-production, so I'm not particularly stressed about it, but it's something to bear in mind, because clearly if TBS and FreeSky don't resolve this, there's a problem coming. Now, ignoring that module, and I'll pop that lid back on, you can see it all goes in nice and securely. We have a rubber hatch at the back here, and if I pop that up, we have an RPSMA connector and another RPSMA connector. To my understanding, one of them is a 900 megahertz external antenna. Oh, sorry, yeah, 900, yeah, long range antenna, and the other's a 2.4 antenna. And then there's another hatch, which if I pop this open, it's a bit tricky to get to, where, I'll bring this up to this camera, you can see there's a whole lot of standard connectors, where we have a USB Type-C for charging the internal battery. To my understanding, this supports 2S batteries only for charging. We've got what looks like a smart port programming lead, a microphone, and probably the head tracker trainer in port. What is interesting to me on this, there's another 2 empty bays, and there has been talk, and if I pop open a little image here, we can see, oh, that's not the right image, there we go. It appears on the tandem specifications that there are 3 different models. There is standard, S, I don't really know what S means, it's got something, but then HD. And what's really interesting, Frsky are claiming to be putting in a digital FPV system with HDMI out. Now, if I look at the port on the back of this radio, there appears to be a mini HDMI port, or at least the hole for it. So there's clearly something in the works here. I don't have any real information bar speculation on it, but if it is the case, this could be very interesting, because you're potentially talking an HDMI out to your goggles and the option of displaying the video on your actual screen. But yeah, the claims of 0 millisecond latency, digital, you know what, we will see. I will believe it when I see it, but it does look rather intriguing. Now, on to the radio and the stuff that's running on it. The Tandem does not support OpenTX currently. Whether or not it will or won't, I don't know. That's to be seen. I suspect it's highly likely it will. However, it does support something called Ethos. Now, Ethos is a new operating system that is being developed by Frsky, and it's getting a lot of input from many of the top players within the field. So you've got guys like Bertrand from OpenTX on it. You've got Mike Schiller, massive glider guy who's working on it. Jetflyer, you know, these are guys who are very into Frsky and also very into top-end flying. So there's a lot of positive feedback coming forward, and from what I have seen on the GitHub repos related to this project, it is so active at the moment. The guys are just constantly tweaking, changing and improving Ethos. So while it's not a finished platform yet, it looks like it may well have some potential. Now, shall we power the radio up? And off we go.
Welcome to Ethos. Switch warning.
There you go. Now, as expected, switch warning because my switches are not in the right positions. I'm sure you guys will be familiar with this sort of prompt that you get. OpenTX is a similar one. Boom, move the one switch back, and there we go. Ethos. Now, when I first got the radio and started playing with it, I went straight to my normal OpenTX style, and I started pressing the buttons on this end here and long press to model, etc. And I was, you know, this is a nice graphical, very visual thing, and everything I was doing was control based. And then suddenly along the way, it dawned on me that actually the whole radio is touch screen. And this is kind of amazing because it changes the way you interface with the model. And, you know, I've got to be honest, I'm still trying to wrap my head around Ethos, and I don't want this to become an Ethos tutorial because this video is not about that. But it's quite fascinating that this whole interface is kind of, you know, touchscreen, and just it almost feels like a mobile phone when using it, because it goes, we'll set that as the current model. You know, it feels like I'm using a phone with drag and drop and, you know, all the regular sort of features you would expect. It's kind of cool. And we can see we can scroll up and down, set various module types, etc. It's pretty cool. Now, in terms of Ethos, as I said, it is very, whilst it's quite progressed and getting close, it's not yet a finished operating system. And I think we will probably, based on what I've seen, be a couple of months off Ethos being production ready. And that ultimately, whilst it's flyable right now, there are features and functions which are missing. And at the moment, certainly on the GitHub repo, as I said, it seems to be very busy and there's changes being committed every day. So I don't think it's far off, but don't expect the radio to be in production and being sold to you next week because it ain't ready for that. It's just getting close. Now, what else can I tell you about Ethos and the fact, I guess, Tandem. What is Tandem? So, Tandem seems to be a new system that FreeSky have, and it's ultimately about being dual band. The radio internally in here, there is a 900 megahertz antenna, I believe, built into the handle, and there's a 2.4 gig antenna in here. So traditional control, everything runs into 2.4, but you can also use the long range 900 meg. Now, based on that logic, the next thing FreeSky have said is let's turn around and make a range of receivers, the tandem receivers, which are dual band. Now, I've not seen one in the flesh, but what it would imply to me is that they are aiming for a 2.4 ecosystem with a 900 megahertz backup of some form. And that would give you a massive sense of reliability to know that you can kind of push out a little bit, particularly for the FPV guys, go behind some foliage and not worry about the 2.4 signal breaking up. Again, early days, I don't really fully know what the architecture and all the various things are going to be there, but it does look interesting. And I think that's going to be a killer feature for the quad guys. So, where else are we? I'm not sure there's much more I can tell you on the radio at the moment beyond the fact that it feels great, it looks great. The guys I have shown it to that I fly with have picked it up and gone, wow, that feels great. It's going to be interesting. I think certainly this radio could become a go-to for many, many people, and maybe it's going to be the de facto upgrade from Tyrannus. So all the guys who are using Tyrannus, if this thing comes up, well, for me, if this supported Crossfire, which I'm sure will eventually come, it may just become my go-to radio for all of my FPV flying. I think, would I use it necessarily for my day-to-day flying on my bigger EDF jets and things? I'd probably be quite happy and comfortable to, but truth be told, I prefer this one. And that's my big jetty tray radio. And I prefer that purely because of how I fly and how I stand. But, you know, look at the disadvantage. That's your tray radio. And that is a nice compact handheld. This thing weighs like 2 kilograms. This thing weighs a kilogram. There's a big difference. So, I think for me personally, it may become a go-to for quick flying sessions. And that's very interesting. It's ideal for me for DLGs. And as I said, I would probably fly my jets and gliders on it quite happily. It does suit climbing up a hill, but I'm still more of a pinch flyer. I prefer standing with a tray radio like that. That's me. I can't complain too much about it, but I do love the whole feel, look, and where this radio is going. I think it's a proper shake-up radio. It's time for the market to have another shake-up, and in this scenario, I think when OpenTX and Tyrannus came out, the market got a big, wake-up shake. And I have a feeling that this radio is going to be the same again for the other manufacturers. They are going to be forced to up their game just that little bit more again, because this thing is a real killer of many other products out there. It's really, really good. So, there you go, guys. I've rambled on a little bit. Hopefully, I've shown you a little bit about the Tandem. I would encourage you, there's an RC Groups thread I'm going to link in the description to this video. I'd recommend you jumped in and actually had a look at that. There's a lot of technical specs that Jetflyer put up. It really goes into a lot of details, and there's a whole lot of high-res images, so you can actually see what the radio looks like beyond my moving it around in the video here. So, enjoy, guys. Have fun. Hope you like it. Cheers.